Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. If everybody can see me and can hear me, give me a thumbs up on your end so I know the audio is working. Sometimes with these tech things, you just never know. So if you can see me and you can hear me, give me a thumbs up on your end. I'm so excited you are all here. I have a very exciting event today that I can't wait to get started. But some quick housekeeping tips. We are here to talk about the art of people management. It's a topic very, very close to my heart, and my guests and I have so much to share when it comes to this. Now, in terms of logistics, today's talk is going to be about 45 minutes or so. So I want you to know that this event, as much as it is a conversation between my guest Angela and I, it's also a time for you. Meaning, if you have any questions, comments, please throw it into the chat function. Whether you're watching on your phone or on your desktop, there is the ability to add your thoughts or questions, and I'm monitoring it as Angela and I are going to be chatting. So please feel free to use that because we want you to feel that this is very much a discussion between all of us. Now, for those who aren't familiar with who I am, I'll do a quick introduction. So, my name is Jessica Chen, and I am the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. We are a communications training company. So, we go into Fortune 100 companies. We train folks how to become better communicators, how to become better public speakers, and how to be better team communicators. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And I always share with folks the reason why I even got into teaching communications is because communications was not something that I really learned growing up. But it doesn't take long to see that learning how to become a better communicator, a strategic communicator, is incredibly important, especially at work. Fortunately for me, I started my career on TV. I was a broadcast TV journalist, and I always tell folks there's really no better place to hone your communications, your presentation skills than having to do it every single day on TV. So after about 10 years, I decided, you know what? I think this is a great opportunity to take everything that I learned, presentation skills, interviewing people, talking to people across different industries, thinking quickly on the spot, small talk, impromptu. And I was like, you know what? I can actually teach this. So it's been about 4 years now, and we've grown to be able to work with some of the best companies in the world. I'm also a top LinkedIn Learning instructor where my courses have been viewed over 2 million times. So if you have not seen any of my courses on LinkedIn Learning, I highly recommend you check it out. So before I invite my guest up, I also want to share that we have a VIP communications pass. And this is a pass where by the way, I do these about every other week or so. So we have these Soulcast Media live events very often. And if you're never sure you can attend, if you become a VIP communications pass holder, you'll get access to all our show notes. So the QR code is going to be up in just a little bit. So check that out. But it's just a great way for you to stay involved, stay engaged, and honestly get all the communication tips my guests and I share. So, without further ado, I'm very, very excited to invite my guest up. So, my guest is Angela Cheng-Cimini. She is the Senior VP of Talent and Chief Human Resource Officer at Harvard Business Publishing. So, let me invite my guest up. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Jessica. Hello, everyone.
I'm so excited that you are here, Angela. I know I did a quick intro of who you are and the work that you do, but please let everybody know a little bit about you.
Yeah, Angela Cheng-Cimini. I've been in human resources for about 30 years. I'm also a mom of two grown children and married my college sweetheart. I've always been in human resources. And in fact, my dad was the one who chose my major. I mean, honestly, who knows what they want to do when they're 17 or 18 years old? And he said, I found this great program for you at Cornell University. Why don't you apply? And I haven't looked back since. And my experiences have taken me across different verticals and industries, but always been in human resources. My passion is about really understanding what makes people great and how organizations can unlock that greatness. So really happy to be with you today.
Your father chose your major. I mean, I feel like for any, what, 18, 19, 20-year-old, he'd be like, "No, dad, like, I'll figure it out myself." But I guess he was right.
Yes, yes, it's a rare piece of credit.
I love it. Okay, so Angela, I feel like there's just so much I want to ask you. You're in such a unique position where you're managing a team and you're thinking about human resources, but really it's about people. And that is what we're talking about today. The art of people management. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. And we're just kind of starting from a very high level here. What's your thought? What's your approach? And how can people better think about managing other people?
So I think there's a fallacy that leadership is something that comes intrinsically. And I think it actually can be learned. And the simple truth is that it's actually pretty easy, right? Think about your worst boss and think about your best boss. What did they do well and what did they do poorly? And how can you turn those into learning moments, right? So the ones who were great bosses probably communicated with you often, expressed their care, gave you course corrections, gave you praise, and let you have the stage, right? So for me, leadership is about providing support, removing obstacles, and then getting out of the way. If you can remember to do those three things, you've pretty much are well on your way to being a really progressive leader. Sometimes I think we overcomplicate leadership.
It's so true. And I feel that oftentimes when people begin to manage other people, or or for those who aspire to manage other people, they get so stressed thinking, "Oh, I have to do this, I have to talk this way, I have to do that." But honestly, it's just understanding people. And I think if you can get there, you're more than halfway. Why do you think people complicate it so much when it's just really getting to connect with others on a just human level?
Because I think there's so much pressure, particularly your first leadership assignment, right? To prove that you belong there, right? I remember I took on a team and there was a woman who had been in the department for much, much longer than I had even been in the workforce. And so one of my very first conversations with her was, talk to me about how you feel about me coming in. Did you want this role? And how is it that I can help you? And she was so sort of taken aback that I wanted to have this really candid conversation with her. She said, actually, I don't want I don't want to be in your role. I'd rather be an individual contributor. But she really appreciated the fact that I recognized that that might have been a sensitive point for her and that I wasn't, that I was happy to sort of just have that conversation with her. And it set us off on the right foot. And turns out that she was one of the most deeply technical, knowledgeable people on my team. And because we started that relationship off right, we were a powerful duo from then on. So I think there's just, again, so much pressure to have all the answers. And actually, your team probably already has the answers. And just knowing how to get that out of them makes them feel great about their ability to impact and, frankly, helps you be successful. So just understanding your own limits and how you can unlock, what other people already do well is half the battle.
It was interesting because while we were doing the countdown, I was in the chat function, kind of just seeing where everybody was calling in, dialing in from, watching from. And one of the beauties of doing these events is we truly have an international audience. I mean,
I noticed that. Yeah.
we have folks from Canada. Of course, we have folks here in the US. We have folks in Europe, India. It's just amazing at how, and it makes me so happy that everybody's here because they're interested in learning about people management. So I'm curious, Angela. Okay. If somebody is a sort of a new manager, okay, so maybe they've been in the workforce for maybe about 5, 10, 15 years, and they're starting to manage people. They maybe have a few years in now. Do you have any tips for these people so they could elevate their managerial skills? Like if there's any few best practices that you can share, what are some things that you would share with these folks?
I would say that the first thing is, check your ego at the door, right? It's to make space for the people on your team. If it's all about you, how can you possibly expect people to bring forth their very best, right? It's already tough enough. It's already competitive enough. It's already high pressurized that the last person in the world who should be making it difficult is you as a manager, right? You want to make that glide path as smooth as possible because there will be bumps. There will be divots. And so you want to make sure that the starting point is something that makes the least path of resistance. So again, don't go in having necessarily all the answers. Yes, you will have experience. Yes, you will have wisdom, because hopefully that's why you ascended to the leadership role. But that doesn't mean you have to make it all about you, right? I think the skill of facilitation is probably the next big thing, right? How do you encourage participation? How do you encourage dissent? How do you get to the best solutions so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Some of the most unexpected solutions come from a place where you weren't expecting it to come from, right? Reading the room is really important. So really having that EQ to know when someone's percolating something and maybe looking a little reluctant to jump in. So making sure that there's, again, space for everybody. And I think we talk so much about inclusivity. It's not just a DEI term. Really, it's a core leadership tool. So I think those two things in tandem can be really powerful.
I feel like sometimes managers, because they have so much on their plate, there's no doubt about it. They have a lot of stakeholders they have to report up to, and they have people they have to manage. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming at best.
Mm.
But it's so critical for a manager, an aspiring manager, to just remember that part of getting a team to be motivated, to do good work, is for them to feel that their leader cares
Yes.
at its most fundamental level. It doesn't mean that you're going to do the work for them. You're going to map out exactly what they need to do. You have to give them that freedom. You have to give them that trust. But ultimately, it's really showing that you care about them. You care about their well-being. You care about, how they're doing. And I sometimes feel that remembering just to do these one-on-one check-ins, they're so valuable. And it's
Yes.
not like having to do it so often, but it's just having this one-on-one time. How are you doing? Like, even aside from work, right? I Before I started Soulcast Media, I remember I've had good managers. I've had really bad managers too. And I remember when I would feel most motivated and most energized, it's when I had managers who I felt I could communicate with, who I could feel comfortable with, who I felt actually cared, versus there were some managers who I felt would always just dictate, command, right? Do this, do that. Never once would they be like, hey, how's it going? Is there anything that I can do to make it a little easier for you? And I remember the first time I had a manager who ever asked me that, is there anything I can do to make it easier for you? I was blown away. In my mind, I was like, wait, what? Like, you're even thinking about how I'm doing? I don't know, Angela, do you have anything similar like that?
So actually, recently I made the rounds throughout my organization to talk about how important those one-on-one moments are. And when we talk about what burnout looks like, there are several dimensions of that. And in the one-on-one, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour, there's a way for you to tackle each one of the elements that drives burnout. So the first one, and you actually said it, Jessica, is just to simply ask, how are you? And don't ask that as a throwaway conversation opener, but really to lean in and be like, how are you? I saw you today. Your camera was off. You're usually much more engaged. You seemed a little like, how are you? Right. And really give that topic of conversation a good 10 minutes. And even if it is, oh, this is what I did over my weekend, right? It's just to demonstrate care and interest. Then ask the person, tell me about something you did that made you really proud. Go in for that first dopamine hit, right? One of the ways to counter burnout is to have people feel like they're making a difference. And when you give them a moment to talk about something that they feel really good about, immediately the brain starts to light up and they feel good. It's a shot of adrenaline. Then pivot and talk about what happened in the last week that frustrated you. Sometimes the problems are big, sometimes the problems are little, but you can right in that moment start to workshop. And when I talked about managers having an obligation to remove obstacles, that's a place to do that. So tell me about why that frustrated you. What can we do about it? And immediately as a manager, you can step up and be like, you know what? I think I can help you with that. Then let's talk about, what are you working on? What are your priorities? Again, another cause of burnout, and you said about a lot of things on your plate. Making sure that your people are working on the right things. Are you only tackling the things that are urgent? What are you doing about the things that are important? And making sure that you're constantly revisiting that list so that their energies are being spent really well. And then, yes, closing with, how can I help you? Now, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes when you ask that question, you're actually putting the onus back on the employee to solve the problem. When the
Mhm.
problem might be they don't know what to do. What you could say alternatively is, I heard you say this. Would it be helpful if I did A, B, and C? and give the person options. Or they might say, no, actually, it would be really helpful if you did these things for me. But whatever it is, be part of the solution, right? And then always end with a little bit more specific praise. You know, that day when you did this, you showed up really well. Keep doing more of that. So all of those things in the span of 15, 20 minutes, not only combat burnout, but they express empathy. It opens the conversation up for a real genuine conversation. And it, of course, it inspires performance.
Here's an interesting question. And I had this conversation recently with somebody where they were working in an organization and their senior leaders brought in a new manager to oversee the team. And so, for this new manager who's now overseeing a group of people who they don't know before, and there was never this new layer, I guess, of management. How can, let's say, this new manager that came in, how can that person quickly build that trust with a team who might be skeptical, like, why are we bringing this other person? Why are we bringing a new manager that we now have to report up to? And it changes the structure. We see this a lot, right? Where people are brought in and the people are a bit apprehensive. They're like, I don't know about this. So I'm curious for this person who just came in, where they're coming into, I guess, a sentiment that's not necessarily encouraging or excited. How can this person build that trust with everybody else?
So I can actually sort of relate. Coming into my role as the head of HR for Harvard Business Publishing, nobody on the HR team actually interviewed me. I was only interviewed by the executive team because that was to be my peer group. And I met with the board chair and obviously the CEO. So when I showed up on day one, not a single person in HR knew what they were getting. And so I had to immediately establish credibility and trust. And so the first 3 months, I just spent it as a listening tour. Now, obviously, there were things that came up that required me to make decisions, but I was really careful to turn the question back. What have you done? What would you do? What do you suggest? And really get the team to participate immediately in making the decisions, right? I didn't want to have to pull rank right away because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Mhm.
And I didn't know where the landmines were. And if you can establish that relationship, the team will tell you, ooh, maybe don't go do that. Maybe do this. Or they'll lean in and they'll start taking you up on the opportunities to speak up. So I'm a little bit familiar with what it is to go into a situation blind and you don't really know what you inherit. But believe me, they were far more apprehensive than I was. And so as you say it absolutely, Jessica, you want to go in and make sure that you put the team at ease right away. And very quickly, I told them how it is that I like to operate, right? I like to have candid conversations. I'm all good with constructive feedback. I encourage dissent. And they tested me early on with some really small things. And when it proved out to be true that I was welcoming of all that, we just grew trust really quickly from there.
A listening tour. I really like that. And I know as a manager, they always say the first 90 days is very important because that's
Yes.
when impressions are being made. That's when people are, kind of testing the waters, like, who's this person? What do they really know? Can I trust them? Right. I'm curious. I want to lean in a little bit more to that. What goes into a listening tour? And is this something that any manager, whether new or not, is this something that they can do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, in fact, one of the ways that we keep ourselves sharp is to constantly be on a listening tour, right? I think, what is it they say when you're talking, you're not listening. So I'm always leaning into the organization. And I'll tell you, I think the reason that I got this job was I told the team that I want to know the people as well as your CFO knows the numbers. And the only way I know the people is if I make it, my intention is to go around and just listen to people. How's it going? What's working? So we just had an all staff. What did you hear from that message? Did it land well? Did it not resonate? I'm constantly looking for feedback. I'm constantly doing a landscape scan. And that's important, particularly in my line of work, because if I roll out a program, a process, a policy, and employees don't get it, then I'm starting on my back foot. So I'm constantly validating, checking, and pressure testing. Now, that's not to say that I roll back every decision I make, because clearly there are times when I have to say, no, actually, this is how we're going to do it. But then it's important for me to say more about why. But a listening tour is something that every manager, in fact, every employee should do. What am I doing well? What am I not doing well? What should I be trying more of? What should I be learning, right? That's not based on tenure. That's not based on your title. That's not based on your discipline. Everyone should be constantly on the lookout for listening.
I I actually want to ask everybody who's watching or listening right now this question. If you think back to a recent manager, or maybe not a recent manager, somebody that who you've reported up to, what's one thing that they did that you really were, wow, that made them a really good manager? Throw it into the chat function. I'm actually curious to get what everybody has to say of, like, in your opinion, in your experience, what have you seen has made somebody a great manager? And then I'm going to flip that question around. Also share what's something that a manager has done that you felt wasn't really helpful. I'd love to get everybody's thoughts on this. What is something that a great manager did, and what's something that a manager, it wasn't, it didn't make you, for example, feel very good? Um, so as people are thinking and writing that in, which I'm very anxious to see what people have to say, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. And I saw this question come up already. What does somebody do when they are promoted within a team and now they are managing people who were once their peers?
So let's go back to some of the tips that I've already given. So the first one is, don't go in thinking you have all the answers. And that's particularly true because you're a known quantity to this team. So hopefully, right, people are, so we just announced a few promotions in our organization, and the emojis with the applause and the hearts and the party hats were flourishing because people already knew that these people were ready for these roles and it was a good selection, right? So you want to make sure that you're only validating that by being progressive, by listening, by being empathetic, by being genuine. So take that first 90 days. Anytime you're in a new role, take that first 90 days to just marinate in the moment and do that listening tour. Okay, so now that I'm new to this team as a manager in a different role, what would you like to see me do differently? What are some opportunities that you think we should be tackling as a team? Because now you have influence. We have an existing relationship. Don't be shy. Come talk to me, right? And I think it's, again, let's keep it simple. Remove obstacles, provide support, and then get out of the way.
I'm looking at a lot of the comments that are coming in, and I feel like a big theme that people are saying is a great manager allows autonomy. There's that trust, right? I can completely understand this feeling of micromanaging and how stressful that is. Here's a question, Angela. You know, when people are dealing, because I know I saw micromanaging as some of the comments that people said was not a great managerial trait. But I feel like, for a manager who is micromanaging, I, you know, let's, the benefit of the doubt is hopefully they're not trying to be malicious about it. It's maybe their way of gaining some sort of control of the situation. But for somebody who may gravitate towards micromanaging people, and then obviously it's causing their team to feel burned out, right? It doesn't feel good. How can somebody who may feel like they might be micromanaging a little bit too much, what would you say to them so they can step back a little bit?
So this is where the skill of managing up becomes really important, right? So you could just, hopefully in that one-on-one say, hey, I've been feeling like you've been giving me a lot of direction, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm good on these 5 things that you coached me on. And actually, what if we set a new cadence? I'll give you a report. I'll send you an email ever so often. And of course, if you have any questions, but otherwise, you can know that I've got it. Is that okay? And sort of ask for permission. If that's a little bit too implied and you need to be more explicit, then manage up a little bit more boldly and say, hey, you know what? I feel a little bit under the microscope, and I would appreciate a little bit more autonomy. If you have concerns about my performance, of course, I'm opening to hear that. But I think I'm ready for a little bit more autonomy than I've experienced recently. And just see where that conversation goes.
I'm like, "Oh my god." I feel like that takes so much honesty. That takes a lot of courage, though, for somebody to have that kind of honest conversation with their manager, where in some ways, it's a little bit of, like, pushing back against their managerial style. But I think you're right, Angela. I think you have to have these candid, honest conversations. Honestly, these are very tricky and sensitive conversations too, but I do think if your manager doesn't necessarily know, right, that what they're doing is actually hurting you more than helping you, it is very important that we take that proactive approach and have that conversation with them. I'm curious, if we lean into that thought a little bit more, is there anything we can do to set the stage for such a sensitive conversation so we're not necessarily catching our manager off guard too? Because of course they're people as well, right? So it's like, how do you yeah, how do you juggle that sensitive conversation where you're almost challenging your boss's managerial style?
Well, one of the best ways to express yourself in a difficult conversation is to talk about how it makes you feel, right? Because you own that, right? And hopefully your manager recognizes that that's not something they can take away from you. And I'll tell you what's even harder, Jessica, than having those conversations is not having them. Because I've been in the place where I'm driving home from work and I'm thinking to myself, I wish I'd only said this. And I wish I'd only said that. Because right now I don't feel really good about myself. My confidence has taken a hit. I know I'm better than this. And really second guessing yourself, that's harder. That's harder. And if you find that you're in an environment where you can't have those conversations, then maybe it's not you. Maybe it's question the environment, right? And I think what took me too long to learn was I don't have to settle. I don't have to compromise. I deserve good leadership. And if my manager needs some coaching from me on how to show up better, I have an obligation to them, and more importantly, to myself, to share that feedback. There is so much opportunity for everyone to find a place where you can have value, where you can have impact. Don't waste your time in an environment that doesn't do that for you. And so give your manager a chance to be better.
Oh, I love that, Angela. And I think about those moments where, like I said, I've had very bosses that really they didn't make me feel good, and it
Yeah.
really just it really
Yes.
eats at you,
It
right?
does. It
And then
does.
it trickles down into other aspects of your life now where, you come home from work very stressed, you become a bit
Yes.
snappy, right? So it's not just being in an environment where your manager is stressing you out, but it's like it affects all parts of your life, your well-being. And you're right, Angela. It's like if you can't even have these honest conversations with your manager, and secondly, if your manager isn't even being open-minded to the conversation you're trying to have, right? It's not like you're trying to fight them, right? It's like you're just trying to engage and communicate
Yes.
and share. And if your manager is like fighting you on it, becoming defensive, I mean, maybe that's something like, wait a second, is this even, like you said, the right environment for me to stay in, for me to be in? Is this an environment where I can actually see myself staying at, right? It's tricky though, right? It's very interesting seeing some of the comments, and I feel like dealing with a difficult manager really hits home for a lot of people. It really does, because
It does.
a lot of people are saying like, oh my gosh, it's so important. So I'm curious, and this is just to like pivot a little bit, but how does somebody become manager leadership material? How does one even do that? And this is assuming, maybe somebody is, kind of in the early-ish in their career. Maybe they're managing maybe one or two people right now, but let's say they want to get to the C-suite level, the senior leadership level. How does one even get there, Angela?
Oh my gosh, Jessica, how much time do we have? I think the first thing is to find yourself a mentor. And if you're lucky enough for that to be your manager, that's fantastic. A lot of times, that's not how the dynamic of that relationship plays out. But find someone who can have those candid conversations with you, right? Someone who can be your sounding board. From a mentor, then go find yourself a sponsor. And those are different. A mentor is someone who sort of gives you coaching and feedback. A sponsor uses their network and their relationships to elevate you. So I'll give you a story. I was able to join a board on the confidence of a sponsor, and I didn't even know he was a sponsor. And he is an executive at a publishing company, and he put my name forward. I didn't ask him to do that. I didn't know he was going to do that, but he saw something in me, had confidence in me, and forwarded my name. And so now I'm trying to do that for others. I'm trying to be sponsors for others so that I can pay it forward. So find yourself a mentor, find yourself a sponsor, But I would say even just start with having conversations with your manager. And if your manager is not the right one, go find yourself another role model and start emulating all those things you see about great leaders, because eventually that will take. And if you are in an organization that identifies that in you, you will be on a fast track to the C-suite before you know it.
I love that you differentiated between mentors and sponsors because I think sometimes people think like, is it just somebody who advocates for me? It's a little different, right? In terms of like
It's
how
different.
they would support you. But a lot of people go, but where? But how? Like, how do do I just say, can you be my mentor? Can you be my sponsor? Like, how do you even engage in that kind of conversation?
I will tell you that one of the nicest things someone said to me was, "I would love for you to be my mentor." And she was an engineer in a previous company that I worked with, and she was a woman, and she said, "Angela, you know, I love the way you lead, and I would love to learn more from you. Would you mind if we just had lunch together once a month?" And that was as simple as that. Everybody's got to eat, right? So she wasn't taking more time out of my day, and it was 20 minutes. I can give someone 20 minutes of my time. So ask someone and say, hey, you know what? I've seen these things, these behaviors in you that really inspire me. I would love if I could just spend some time with you and have you give me some coaching and tips. And you'd be surprised at how many people would be willing to share of themselves. And you never know until you ask. I am talking a lot, Jessica, to your point about courage and about being brave. But leadership is about pushing the envelope, putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, about growing. And so being able to be a little bit uncomfortable. Yes, someone might say, no, you know what? I don't have time to be a mentor. That's okay. Go find someone else. And yes, maybe you're going to get some critical feedback. That's okay. Take that as a learning, right? Being a leader is being not afraid of the uncomfortable things. So it's a great testing ground.
There must be some sort of is there any I mean, actually, yeah, is there like a strategy for how like what kind of message would resonate with you, Angela? Like if somebody was like, "Oh, I really want Angela to be my mentor." Like, is it how they ask you? Will that make a difference? Like, what would you need to see or feel to feel like, "Ah, yes, I really would want to be that person's mentor or sponsor." How is it in the way they ask you, do you think really matters?
Um, I'm not sure that it is, but I do think that there is an element, Jessica, of what do I see in that person where I can be helpful?
Mhm.
Right? If this person is open to learning, if they're just doing it because they want to be politically ambitious, I probably would choose to spend my time somewhere else. But if someone is genuinely interested in growth, they're actively looking for feedback, I see them changing their behavior as a result of our conversations, then that's a relationship I want to invest in. So I think I would want to hear from someone why they want a mentor and why they want it to be me.
One of the things that I often talk about here at Soulcast Media, given what we do, it's we talk about communications. And there's no doubt about it. Great leadership is also great communications. Great
Yes.
leaders are great communicators.
Yes.
Angela, I want to ask you, how have you thought about your communications? I mean, you are very well spoken, you're very articulate, you're very clear. Is that something that came naturally to you? Is this something that you learned? How did you hone your communication skills?
Oh my gosh. So when I was in elementary school, every quarter on every report card would be like, she talks too much. Like, she's a great student. She talks too much. So I think I've always had an energy. I've always been an extrovert. I did a lot of drama when I was growing up. I had my share of drama growing up. Um, but I've learned to funnel that and channel that into, I hope, better public speaking. It is definitely a learned experience, which means you have to put yourself out there. The best way, Jessica, and you know this better than anybody, the best way to get better at it is just to do it. So you have to put yourself where you're going to stand up in front of a room of strangers. You're going to talk about a subject, hopefully, that you're passionate about, because that's half the battle. But you've just got to find opportunities to do it. And even if that's finding a friend to practice with, do
Mhm.
that too. Or even if it's practicing it by yourself and videotaping yourself, super uncomfortable, but it's the best way to pick up what are your ticks, what are your habits, what are the things that you can do better. It is definitely a learned practice and something I've honed over 30 years.
And it's always an ever learning skill, right? You're
Yes.
always learning. I always say communications, public speaking, it's not, you do it and you've mastered it. Your environment changes, the people are in that environment changes, so you have to constantly be adaptable. And that's the thing. the more you do it, the easier it gets. So then, Angela, do you never get those nerves of, when you're public speaking?
Oh, I love that question, Jessica, because in high school, whenever we were getting ready to go on stage, I had a drama teacher. She said that feeling is adrenaline. Think of it as positive energy, right? It's getting all of your senses heightened. It's getting ready to absorb the energy of the people around you. Channel it. Don't see it as, oh my God, this is failure nerves. This is success nerves. And I think that's true for everything. If you can just flip it, if you can change the narrative, if you can reframe it, almost everything has a yin and a yang. And you can find the positives if you just look hard enough, right? Even critical feedback has a positive element to it, right? It's, oh, don't do that again. Try something else.
It's what you choose to think, right? It's what
Absolutely.
do you wanna dwell on this, or do you wanna actually think about it this way? I'm the first to admit to people, even though I teach people public speaking presentation, I still get nervous. But you're right, it's really thinking about it's the good stuff, right? It's the successful nerves, it's the adrenaline, it's the
Yes.
energy. I that's how I see it. For example, I do a lot of trainings virtually because given with like the pandemic, that's kind of how we had to pivot our business. So for several years I haven't had to do in-person trainings, but now that we're getting back into it, I'm now going in and doing more in person, and I'm once again, oh, I'm feeling nervous, right? But I think that's okay. It's okay to feel that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes even acknowledging it, right? Like, oh my gosh, guys, I'm kind of nervous. So forgive me if I flutter a little bit. And then you get in the groove and it's okay, right? That's also authentic leadership, right? Dropping the facade a little bit to say, you know what, guys, I'm a little uncomfortable. I'll tell you, I see a colleague of mine here on the call. We recently lost an employee. He passed away very suddenly, and we did a tribute. And there was a segment of the meeting where I had to speak, and I couldn't collect myself. And I found myself shedding tears in front of 350 of our colleagues. And what I thought was a really awkward moment actually turned out to be people were like, Angela, you were vulnerable. You were authentic. It was clear that you cared about this colleague, and it was beautiful. And so sometimes we just have to go with that and remember that we're all human, and particularly in leadership, dropping that facade and just being genuine can be really powerful. Now, I'm not saying I was playing that for points because I really wasn't. If I could do it over again, I would have preferred to have been more collected, but it was what it was. And so I just took it for that.
I think sometimes when people think of managers, it's like, oh, you have to act a certain way, you have to speak a certain way, right? But I feel like that's not necessarily true, right? You don't need to put on this shield, this bravado for people to
Yes,
listen to you at all, right?
agreed.
I think people connect with other people, other managers, when they can see this human side to them. And, and it's funny because like all the comments that are coming through are people talking about the managers that they've had that they've loved or didn't really like their style. But eventually, maybe all of us will become managers one day, whether you are or not. And I think a lot of the things you and I are talking about right now are just things that we can just internalize and just think about as we go about our week and our day. So we're we're almost about to wrap up here, which to me, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like there's still so much for us to talk about. But as we start to kind of wrap up this thought of like the art of people management, what would is there anything you would share with folks of a lot of the lessons you learned along the way? I call them golden nuggets. Any golden nuggets you'd love to share with folks of how they can think about managing people and doing it well?
Yeah. So I think it's ironic that you use the word golden, because the golden rule used to be treat people as you wish to be treated. And that framing has changed to treat people the way they want to be treated, right? So people learn differently, they process ideas differently, they want to be led differently. Some people love hugs, others prefer a handshake, right? Others want to talk to you every day. Some once a week is good. Some are really structured. Some are more winding. So as a manager, it's situational leadership, understanding what works best for the person who's receiving your message. And the way to do that is taking time to get to know who's on the other end. I think people want to know who it is they're fighting for. Why am I slogging through this? If I'm inspired by you, Jessica, I'm going to go the extra mile. If I feel like you don't know anything about me, you don't care about me, I might just phone it in. So I think leadership is really about leaning in, being part of the team. There's this graphic around how teams evolve. And it starts with, the manager at the top and the team below. Then the team evolves to the managers in the middle and the teams around. Then the manager sits on the circle with everybody else. And the final stage is when the manager is not even on the circle because the team is self-managing, they're autonomous. And so think about, how do you move yourself along that continuum so that even if you're not there, the team still knows how to operate. They know what their goals are. They know what the norms are. They come to you when they need help because you're still hanging out. You're still there, right? You're there for air cover. But you're so far removed from the command and control. And so I think the art of leadership is just making sure that you know who it is that works for you. You give them what they need, and then you get out of the way.
I love that. One final question, and this is a question that I always like to ask folks because I talk a lot about advocating and how we can better advocate for others and how people can advocate for us. And so, my question for you, Angela, is so the whole theme of our talk today is like how we can be better managers to people. But let's say if we flipped it a little bit, how can we or what can we do so that we can better advocate for ourselves? This is a question that I'm curious to get your thoughts, but this has to do with, of course, communications. But what can we do, or do you have any tips of how we can better advocate for ourselves so we can build visibility in our managers' eyes?
Well, Jessica, I think we touched on it just even in this conversation, and it's really being true to yourself and finding the courage to do that. Right? I mean, I talked about mentors, I talked about sponsors, we've talked about great managers, and all of those people will do that for you. They will speak for you, they'll speak on your behalf, but ultimately you have to be your own greatest champion. And when you recognize that that is your own obligation, then you can find the power to do that. And that means, hey, I'm being micromanaged, or that means, hey, I need more clarity, or hey, that means I'm really struggling at home, I need a few days off. Whatever the situation is, right? Be your own best champion. And if your manager isn't doing that for you, give them a chance to be better, or perhaps find a different place where you can really thrive.
Angela, I appreciate you so much.
Thank
And
you, Jessica.
I can safely say a lot of us here have appreciated your insight and your willingness to share just what you've learned, the tips that you've shared with us today. So, if people want to connect with you, Angela, where can they find you? Where can they best do that?
Well, I am the only Angela Cheng-Cimini on LinkedIn. So if anybody would like to connect with me, just let me know that you tuned in to Jessica and me on Soulcast Media, because I won't have a chance to catch everyone's name because the chat is going, but happy to connect with anyone here.
Angela, thank you so much for being here. And hopefully, everybody who's listening, who's watching, whether it's your morning, your evening, or afternoon, I know we have a global audience here. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen in. Like I mentioned earlier, we do these Soulcast Media Live events every week or so, every other week or so. And my next one is actually going to be about developing executive presence. So you can, it's a topic I love talking about too. So for those who are interested in attending that one, you can head to our website, soulcastmedia.com, and RSVP for that. And for those who also didn't get a chance to take down any notes, like I mentioned earlier, we have our VIP communications pass, and that just gets you access to all the show notes from this event and all our events. So if you frequently attend and you just can't write down your notes quick enough, we do it for you. So, Angela, thank you again for being here. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And we hope to be connected with all of you soon. So, take
Thank
care.
you.